The elevator always took exactly 43 seconds to reach the 14th floor. And I knew this because I had counted it every morning for 2 years, standing with my coffee going cold in my hand, and my lanyard twisted around my fingers, trying not to think about how much I did not want to be there. Not at the hospital, I mean. I loved the hospital. I loved the smell of antiseptic and the way the night shift nurses left little notes for the day shift on the whiteboard by the nursing station. Things like someone ate Keisha's yogurt again, and Mr. B in 1402 wants the TV remote closer to his left hand, not his right. Please, for the love of God. I loved that. I loved being useful in a place where useful actually meant something. What I did not love, what I was actively dreading on that particular Tuesday in November, was the possibility of stepping off that elevator and running into my ex-boyfriend in the hallway. His name was Preston. He was a hospitalist, one of the attending physicians on the internal medicine floor, and we had dated for 14 months before I ended it in August. I ended it because he had started checking my phone while I slept. He had started calling me twice, sometimes 3 times, on my lunch breaks, not to talk, just to ask where I was, who I was with, whether I had eaten with anyone. He had started doing this thing where he would say something that made me feel small, and then, when I reacted, look at me with this expression of genuine bewilderment, like I was a difficult patient misreading a benign set of symptoms. I had finally said, on a Sunday afternoon while he was making pasta in my kitchen, like he owned it, that I did not think this was working. He had set down the wooden spoon very carefully. He had said, "I think you're confused." I was not confused. But here is the thing about ending a relationship with someone who works in the same building as you. The ending does not actually end. It just changes shape. It becomes a thing you have to navigate every single day, along with medication rounds and incident reports, and the fact that the coffee machine on the 14th floor has been broken since September, and nobody has fixed it. I was the patient flow coordinator for the internal medicine unit. What that meant, practically, was that I sat at a desk near the nursing station and managed bed assignments, discharge timelines, and the never-ending bureaucratic choreography of moving patients through a system that was always at capacity and always underfunded. I was good at it. My supervisor, who had been doing this job for 22 years, once told me that I had the kind of brain that could hold 12 problems at once and sort them in order of urgency without breaking a sweat. What she did not know was that I had developed that skill largely by learning how to stay calm while Preston stood in my apartment doorway at 11 o'clock at night, asking me to explain who had liked my Instagram post. November in Toronto is gray in a way that feels personal. It is not the dramatic gray of a storm rolling in. It is just a flat, cold, indifferent gray, like the sky has decided it is done with you and is simply waiting for you to figure that out. I had walked to work that morning with my scarf pulled up to my chin and my hands shoved in my pockets, and I had felt, for the first time in a few weeks, something close to okay. Preston and I had managed, through a combination of mutual avoidance and what I can only describe as institutional choreography, to mostly stay out of each other's way since August. He worked the afternoon to evening shift, 3 days a week. I left at 5. If I timed my lunch correctly, I could go the whole day without seeing him. But sometimes the choreography broke down. The elevator opened on 14 and I stepped out, and there he was, standing at the nursing station with a chart in his hand, talking to one of the nurses. He looked up. Our eyes met. The nurse looked between us with the practiced neutrality of someone who had witnessed this particular dynamic before and had chosen, wisely, to become briefly very interested in her computer screen. Preston said, "Hey," I said, "Morning," and walked past him toward my desk. For a moment, I thought that was going to be it. I thought we had achieved the minimum viable version of coexistence. I sat down, opened my laptop, pulled up the bed management system, and started going through the overnight intake notes. Then he appeared at the edge of my desk. "Can we talk? I have a full board this morning." "It won't take long." I kept my eyes on my screen. "Preston, I really have to. I just think we should clear the air." His voice had that tone it got when he was being reasonable at me. That careful, measured, physician tone that was designed to make me feel like I was the one being irrational. "It's been 3 months. This is starting to affect my ability to work. Your ability to work, I repeated. People noticed the tension. I looked up at him then. I want to say I looked at him with steel in my eyes, with the quiet certainty of a woman who had done the work and knew exactly who she was. Mostly, I just felt tired. I have 17 patients in various stages of admission and discharge. I have to coordinate with 2 floors and a surgical team before noon. I cannot clear the air right now. He held my gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he said, "Fine," in a way that did not mean fine, and walked away. I turned back to my screen and breathed. The morning moved the way mornings in that unit always moved, too fast and in 6 directions at once. A patient on 1408 needed a transfer to the cardiac unit that the cardiac unit wasn't ready for. A family in 1411 had questions that weren't in my jurisdiction, but that I fielded anyway, because that was simply how the day went. The coffee I'd brought from home went cold on my desk. At 11:15, my phone rang. Internal line. It was Preston. I let it ring. It rang again at 11:40. At 12:10, he appeared at my desk again. I was on the phone with a discharged nurse from a long-term care facility, and I held up one finger without looking at him. He stood there. I kept talking. He was still standing there when I hung up. "You're not answering my calls," he said. "I was working. I called from the ward line." "I know." Something shifted in his face. Not anger exactly. It was more like the mask slipping for just a second. That careful reasonableness giving way to something tighter underneath. "I've been patient," he said quietly. "I've given you space. I think I deserve some acknowledgement of that." I thought about a lot of things I could say. I thought about asking him what exactly he wanted me to acknowledge. I thought about pointing out that 3 months of not cornering me in the elevator was not patience. It was the baseline expected behavior of someone who had claimed to care about me. I thought about saying that I had filed a report with HR in September, quietly, without making it a thing, because I did not want to blow up his career over what I still, foolishly, at that point, hoped might resolve itself. Instead, I said, "Preston, please don't call me from the ward line for personal conversations. If you need to discuss patient flow, you can email me or come through the charge nurse." "That's very formal." "Yes," I said. "It is." He left. I sat there for a moment with my hands very still on my keyboard and thought, I am okay. I am still okay. There was a man who came in on Wednesdays. He wasn't a patient. He wasn't a physician or a vendor or any of the other categories of people who moved through that floor on a regular basis. He was, as far as I could tell, someone who visited a patient in one of the private rooms at the end of the hall. The rooms that had a slightly different quality of quiet about them. The ones I always imagined cost more, though technically every room in the hospital was the same price because this was Canada, and we had a public health system, and I was not supposed to think about that. I noticed him the first Wednesday in October. He was tall and broad-shouldered in the way that made the hallway feel slightly narrower, and he wore a dark coat that was clearly expensive, though he wore it like he had forgotten he had it on. He spoke very quietly to the nurses, and they spoke quietly back, and there was something in the way they did that. None of the usual brief professional warmth, just a careful, respectful quiet. That made me look up from my screen. He had gray eyes. I know that sounds like a cliché. I have read enough of those comments under YouTube videos to know that gray eyes are, statistically, a very rare thing, and that the internet has strong feelings about their overuse in fiction. I am telling you they were gray because they were gray. This is the thing about real life. Sometimes it is a cliché. He glanced at me when he passed the nursing station. Not the glance that people give the person at the desk. The functional, transactional glance that means, you are the obstacle between me and what I need. Just a look. Brief, even. But direct in a way that I was not expecting. I looked back at my screen. He came back the next Wednesday. And the one after that. I did not know who he was. I did not ask. Patient privacy meant that the nurses wouldn't tell me, and honestly, it was not my business. I told myself I was curious the way you are curious about anything that is slightly unusual in an environment you know very well. The anomaly detection part of my brain, the part that made me good at my job, had flagged him as something that did not fit the pattern. That was all. But I noticed that he always brought flowers. Not the cheerful supermarket bouquet kind. The kind with the cellophane that crinkles and the little card stuck in the middle that says, "Get well soon." In bubble letters. These were just flowers. Like someone had picked them with specific intention. I noticed that he always stayed exactly 1 hour. I noticed that on the second Wednesday, he paused at the nursing station on his way out and said to the charge nurse, not to me, the woman at the bed coordinator desk, "Has she been having any trouble today?" I was close enough to hear this. I pretended not to be. The charge nurse, whose name was Keisha and who I trusted with my life and also with my leftover lunch when I couldn't finish it, glanced at me briefly and said, "Not that I'm aware of." He nodded. He left. I stared at my screen for about 30 seconds. Then I said, without looking up, "Keisha." "I know," she said. "What does he?" "I genuinely don't know," she said. "He asked the same thing last week." The thing about Preston was that he escalated slowly. That was what made it hard to explain to people, after the fact. There was never a single moment that you could point to and say, "There, that is when it became a problem." It was more like the temperature in a room dropping 1 degree at a time. By the time you were cold, you had forgotten what warm felt like. By November, the calls to the ward line had become a regular thing. He had taken to leaving notes in my workplace mailbox. Not threatening notes. Nothing I could take to HR and have them look at me as anything other than a difficult coworker overreacting to a messy breakup. Just notes. "Hope you're well. Saw the report on 1409. Good work. Are you free for coffee?" Signed with his name, like I might have forgotten who he was. My HR report from September had resulted in a meeting, a mediated conversation I had not wanted to have, and a mutual agreement that we would maintain professional boundaries. Preston had been polite and remorseful in that meeting. He had looked at the HR coordinator with an expression of genuine concern and said that he had not realized his behavior had been coming across that way, and that he would, of course, correct it immediately. He did, for about 3 weeks. I had not filed a second report because I was afraid of being told, again, that there wasn't enough to action on. I was afraid of being looked at like someone who was making a big deal of small things. I know how that sounds. I know that I am a patient flow coordinator in a hospital, and I know the cost of delayed intervention better than most people. And still, somehow, I could not apply that knowledge to my own situation without feeling like I was being dramatic. That is the thing no one tells you about being in one of these situations. The part that lingers isn't the fear, exactly. It's the self-doubt. The constant recalibration of, am I overreacting? On a Thursday in the 3rd week of November, Preston came to my desk at the end of my shift. I was shutting down my laptop. I had my jacket on. I had my bag on my shoulder. I was, in every physical sense, already gone. He leaned against the desk and said, "You filed a new report." I had, that morning, because the notes in the mailbox and the ward line calls had added up to something I had finally decided I could document. "That's not something I'm going to discuss with you," I said. "You're trying to end my career." "I'm trying to do my job." Lily. He never used my name like that when we were together. He uses it now like a hand placed on my shoulder when I'm trying to walk away. "I love you. I have been trying to show you that in every way I can think of. What else do you want me to do?" "I want you to leave me alone," I said. "That's it. That is the only thing." His expression shifted. "You don't mean that." "I do. You're scared. You always do this when you're scared, Preston." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm leaving now. Please don't follow me." I walked away. I made it to the elevator. I pressed the button and stood there watching the numbers change, and I thought, very clearly, I can't keep doing this. The elevator opened. I stepped in, and then I heard his footsteps in the hallway behind me. He caught the elevator door with his hand. He stepped in. The doors closed. We were alone. "I just want to talk," he said. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I'm going to need you to step out of this elevator." "Lily, Preston, I'm asking you to step out of this elevator right now." He didn't. He reached out and put his hand on my arm, not hard, not violently, but firmly, like punctuation. Like he was just making sure I understood that he was still there. And that was when the elevator doors opened again. The floor we'd stopped on wasn't the lobby. We were on 12, the administrative floor, The doors opened and a man stepped in without looking up from the folder he was holding. And then he looked up, and it was the man with the gray eyes. He took in the scene in about 1 second. My arm, Preston's hand on it, the distance between us, the look on my face. His gaze moved from me to Preston, and he said mildly, "You need to let go of her arm." Preston's hand dropped. He looked at this man the way people look at someone they can't quite categorize, trying to figure out if there's a hierarchy here and where he falls in it. "Excuse me? You heard me?" "This is a private conversation." The man looked at him for a moment with an expression I found hard to describe. It was not aggressive. It was not the manufactured calm of someone trying to de-escalate a situation. It was just quiet, the kind of quiet that does not need anything from you. "No," he said. "It isn't." Preston looked at me. I don't know what he was looking for. Some signal, maybe. Some version of me that would smooth this over. "Lily, I'd like you to leave me alone," I said. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Preston looked between us one more time, and then he walked out. His footsteps were sharp on the tile floor. The doors closed behind him. I stood there for a moment. The man was still in the elevator, though I had not noticed him press a button for another floor. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes." My voice was strange and thin. "Thank you. Has he done that before? Put his hands on you?" Not like that. Not physically. I stopped. "I'm sorry. You don't need the whole story. I'm not asking because I need it," he said. "I'm asking because it matters." I looked at him then, really looked. He was maybe late 30s, early 40s. Dark hair, starting to gray at the temples. The coat, up close, was charcoal wool. There was nothing about him that performed wealth or power. It was more that he simply occupied space like a man who had never had to compete for it. "My name is Lily," I said, which was a strange thing to lead with, but it felt necessary. "I know," he said. And then, before I could ask, "You're at the coordinator desk on 14. I've seen you every Wednesday for 2 months." The elevator doors opened on the lobby. Neither of us moved for a second. "I'm Callum," he said. I almost told him I knew a Callum once in university, which would have been an absurd thing to say. Instead, I said, "The woman you visit. On the ward. My mother," he said. "She's been there since September. I'm sorry." "She's doing better." He paused. "She talks about the nurses, says the one named Keisha brings her tea without being asked. Keisha's like that." He smiled. It was brief, not the kind of smile that asked anything of you, just a small acknowledgement. "I noticed what's been happening," he said, "on the ward, with the calls, and the—" He stopped. "It's not my business. I know that. You've been watching. I've been concerned." He held the elevator door with one hand. "If he bothers you again, I'd like to know." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because some things shouldn't be allowed to continue," he said. "And sometimes they do anyway, because no one says anything." I did not know what to do with that. I did not know what to do with any of it. The directness, the simplicity, the fact that he had just said the thing that every person in my life had been carefully not saying for 3 months, which was that this was not okay and someone should do something about it. "Lord, I filed a report this morning," I said. "With H. Good." And he said it like it was just a fact. Not like good for you or that was brave. Just good. "This is the correct thing. Does that feel like enough?" "I don't know yet." He nodded, slowly. He let the elevator door go. "Get home safe tonight, Lily." I walked out of the hospital into the November gray, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and did something I had not done in a while, which was breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. I looked him up that night, because I am a human being who had just had an unexpectedly significant encounter in an elevator, and I Googled him. His full name was Callum Whitfield. He was the co-founder and CEO of a private equity group that, among other things, held a significant stake in the healthcare network that included my hospital. He had started the company at 31 with a business partner, had taken it public at 35, and was now, according to a Globe and Mail profile from 2 years ago, one of the more quietly influential figures in Canadian healthcare investment. I sat with that information for a while. Then I thought about the flowers he brought every Wednesday, the way he spoke to the nurses like they were people, the way he had stood in that elevator and said, "You need to let go of her arm," in a voice that was not raised at all. I thought about how, for the first time in months, I had fallen asleep before midnight. The next day, Preston was gone from the afternoon schedule. I didn't know why. I didn't ask. On Friday, the HR coordinator called me into her office and told me that a review had been opened. She said there had been additional information provided that had allowed them to treat my concerns with greater urgency. She would not say where the additional information had come from. I did not ask. On Wednesday, Callum came. He stopped at the nursing station on his way to his mother's room. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, "She's having a good day today." Keisha said she finished her whole lunch. Something in his face changed, just slightly. "Thank you for telling me that." "Thank you," I said, "for last week." He did not say it was nothing, which I appreciated because it had not been nothing. He said, "How are you doing?" "Better," I said. "Actually better." He nodded. He went down the hall. He was back in exactly 1 hour, and on his way out, he paused again. "The report," he said. "Are they taking it seriously?" "It looks that way." "Good." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I eat at the cafe across the street most Wednesdays before I come in, around 12, if you ever wanted company." It was the least dramatic invitation I had ever received. No weight to it, no expectation. Just, the cafe across the street, 12 o'clock if you wanted. "Okay," I said. He raised an eyebrow, like he had been prepared for a different answer. "Okay, I get half an hour for lunch," I said. "The cafe's close enough." He smiled then. Properly, this time, not the brief controlled one from the elevator. "I'll see you Wednesday." We had lunch 4 times before he told me that he had, in fact, reached out to someone he knew on the hospital's board after the elevator incident. He was careful about how he said it. He said it the way someone says a thing when they know it might land wrong, but they have decided that the truth is more important than the soft version of it. I was quiet for a moment. "I want to be annoyed at you for that," I said. "I know. I had already filed a report. You had. And they were moving very slowly on it. I could have handled it." "Yes," he said simply. "You could have. I believe that. I still did what I did." I looked at him across the cafe table. Outside the window, it had started to snow. The first real snow of November, coming down in fat, slow flakes that settled on the awning and on the parked cars and on the people hurrying past with their heads down. "Why?" I said. He thought about it. I liked that about him. That he actually thought about questions before he answered them, rather than reaching for the nearest reasonable-sounding thing. "Because I had the ability to make it stop faster," he said. "And I have made a habit, professionally, of not using that when I could. Of letting processes run their course. Letting institutions do what they're supposed to do." He paused. "But watching you walk back to that desk every morning for 2 months, and handle something that shouldn't have been yours to handle alone. I didn't want to be someone who let that continue, because it wasn't technically my business." I looked down at my coffee. "That's a very honest thing to say. I'm a fairly honest person. That's not something honest people usually announce." "Fair," he said, and I heard the smile in his voice. "I take it back." It was the first time in a very long time that I had laughed at a cafe table without calculating who was watching, and what they thought.
His mother's name
was Elaine. She came home in December, 7 weeks after I first saw Callum in the hallway. I was working the day she was discharged, and I helped coordinate the paperwork. She was small and sharp-eyed and walked with a cane, and when she passed my desk on the way out, she stopped and looked at me with the directness of someone who has recently been reminded that time is finite and pleasantries are optional. "You're the one my son has lunch with," she said. "I work with the Wednesday lunch slot," I said, which made no sense, but I was flustered. She looked at me for a second longer. "He doesn't usually eat lunch," she said. "He says he doesn't have time." She said this with the tone of someone reporting a medical anomaly that I might find professionally relevant. Then she patted my hand and walked to the elevator. Callum, behind her, mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry." I shook my head. I was not sorry at all. In January, Preston's contract was not renewed. I found out the way you find out about things like that in a hospital. Someone mentioned it, offhandedly, in the break room, in the way that workplace departures are always discussed, with the kind of carefully neutral language that everyone understands but no one says outright. I sat with that information for an afternoon, trying to identify how I felt about it. What I felt, mostly, was relief, and underneath that, something older and quieter. The feeling of a story reaching its actual ending, rather than just going silent. I called my sister that evening. We talked for an hour about nothing much. She asked how work was going. I told her it was good, actually. Better than it had been in a while. She said, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like yourself," she said. "Like you did before." I thought about the elevator in November. About 43 seconds. About a man with gray eyes who had said, "You need to let go of her arm," in a voice that didn't need to be anything other than what it was. I thought about Wednesdays. About a cafe table by a window. About the kind of lunch that starts as half an hour and runs over, because neither of you has noticed the time, and neither of you minded. I thought about what it felt like to be seen clearly by someone who did not need anything from you in exchange. "Yeah," I said to my sister. "I think I'm back."